Millionaire CEO took the nanny to a company gala, but what she did shocked everyone. If someone had told HarperCollins that her worn-out sneakers would one day walk her into the most elite ballroom in Manhattan, she would have laughed out loud. As a part-time caregiver for a sharp but sweet 7-year-old boy named Max, Harper's days were filled with math homework, peanut butter sandwiches, and Lego minefields. She was bright, independent, and used to staying in the background. She had dreams, big ones, but life had other plans. Then came that Thursday. It was already 6 p.m., and Harper had just helped Max settle into a dinosaur documentary when she heard the front door click open. Walking in with the weight of Wall Street on his shoulders was Grant Remington, the elusive CEO of Remtech Max's father and Harper's employer. His suit looked like it cost more than her entire college tuition, and his eyes carried a storm that meant only one thing: something was wrong. "Can I talk to you?" he said, his voice calm but cold. She followed him to the foyer, wiping chalk dust from her hands. "Is Max okay?" "He's fine," Grant replied. Then turning fully to face her, "I need you to come with me tonight, to the Remtech Gala." Harper blinked. "You're joking." "No. My intended guest canceled and the optics are important. The PR team's scrambling. You're here. You're smart. I've already arranged for a car and a stylist. Be ready in 2 hours." She gawked. "Grant, I'm Max's nanny. I wasn't hired to wear high heels and schmooze with hedge fund execs." "That may be true," he replied, cool as ever. "But tonight, you're also the company's damage control." And just like that, the door closed behind him. Harper stood alone, stunned. Her pulse raced with a mix of dread and defiance. She wasn't a prop. If she was going to walk into that world, it wouldn't be as a pawn. It would be as her own person. For once not hiding behind her past, but owning it. She didn't know it then, but the moment she agreed to step into that ballroom, she was stepping into a chapter that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. The stylist's name was Ruby, and she breezed into Harper's tiny apartment with a confidence that could part clouds. "We've got 2 hours to turn Cinderella into a headliner," she declared, arms draped with silk gowns and hangers clinking like wind chimes. Harper was nervous. She had never worn anything more formal than a graduation gown, and even that she borrowed. But Ruby worked magic. When Harper finally looked at herself in the mirror, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Not just a polished version of herself, but the real version, confident, luminous, capable. The woman she'd tucked away under years of exhaustion and small paychecks. By 8 p.m., she stepped out of the car in front of the Remtech Tower ballroom. Lights glimmered across the building's glass facade, and inside some of the most powerful names in finance and tech were already mingling under chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks. Grant was waiting just inside, adjusting his cufflinks. When he saw her, his expression faltered for the first time since she'd met him. "You clean up well?" he said, a rare note of surprise in his voice. Harper smirked. "You're not so bad yourself, boss." He extended his arm and she took it. Not because she was pretending, but because she chose to. The moment they entered the ballroom, the air shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Harper in a deep red gown with a minimalist cut and a touch of old Hollywood glamour stood out, not because she tried to, but because she didn't. No oversized jewelry, no rehearsed smile, just grace. Among the guests was Victoria Langford, Grant's ex and the daughter of a media mogul. Elegant ice blonde and clearly startled to see Harper at Grant's side. "Oh," Victoria said, her voice dripping with forced charm. "Didn't realize we were inviting the staff to these things now." Harper met her gaze coolly. "I almost didn't come," she said, but someone had to bring a little authenticity to the room. Grant suppressed a grin. Victoria didn't. The crowd began whispering. Who was this woman? Why had Grant brought her? Was this a publicity stunt? But Harper didn't flinch. When an investor from Seattle asked what her role was, she smiled and answered with calm dignity. "Let's just say, I help keep things in perspective." Then something remarkable happened. During a casual conversation by the Champagne Tower, one of the international partners, a French venture philanthropist named Jules Marchand, overheard her talking about urban education and energy equity. "You sound like someone who's read the Lumiere Foundation's case study," he said. "I have," Harper replied, eyes steady. "Pages 12 through 28 are where the real story starts." That made Jules blink. Very few people catch that. Grant turned to her, brow raised. He hadn't known she'd read that. He hadn't known any of this. The gala wore on, but Harper had already left a mark. Not because she was dressed to impress, but because she carried herself like someone who had nothing to prove, yet everything to offer. And Grant Remington, CEO of Remtech, who had built empires out of certainty and control, was suddenly standing next to a woman who made the whole room feel like it was seeing something new, someone they had all missed because they weren't looking. The gala was barely over the last of the guests trickling out into the New York night when Harper sat in the back of the town car beside Grant, still too aware of the shimmer in her dress and the fact that she had just held her own against billionaires and board members. She didn't speak, neither did he. But his eyes kept darting toward her like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd just discovered existed. The next morning, Grant knocked on the door to the guest suite she used at his penthouse. He didn't usually do that. He never did that. "I need to talk to you," he said. Harper leaned on the doorframe. "About last night. About what comes next." He walked into the living room and pulled out a folder from under his arm. Inside was a formal document, a contract. Harper's name was already printed on it. "I want you to keep attending public functions with me," Grant said, his tone calculated but not cold. "Dinners, meetings, press appearances, everything. You want me to be your, what, professional plus one? Think of it as a short-term arrangement," he replied. 2 months. In exchange, I'll add a generous bonus to your current salary. You'll also have full freedom with Max. Whatever methods you believe work best." Harper's arms crossed slowly. "So, you want me to play your girlfriend?" "Yes, not romantically, just for optics." The board was impressed last night. The press was quiet, that's rare, and investors liked what they saw. She stared at him unimpressed. "You don't think that's unethical, weird, possibly humiliating for me?" Grant hesitated. "You're not a prop, Harper. That's not what I'm asking. What I saw last night, it wasn't staged. It was you. Real. I just want to keep that energy around and give you something in return." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Harper stepped forward and placed her hand over the folder. "All right, but I have conditions." He raised an eyebrow. "First, Max is my domain, no interference. Second, I dress how I want. I won't be a mannequin. Third, you don't give me orders outside this agreement. And fourth, there's a fourth." "There is," she said, leaning in just slightly. "I get to walk away whenever I want. No drama, no questions. When the act ends, it ends on my terms." Grant nodded slowly, visibly surprised, but respectful. "Deal," he said and extended his hand. She shook it firm and steady. But in that brief moment, his skin against hers, his eyes meeting hers with something unfamiliar, there was a flicker of something neither of them could name. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Harper's presence by Grant's side became common at Remtech events. Dressed in simple tailored pieces, she chose herself. She offered wit instead of small talk, insight instead of flattery. She didn't try to fit in, and that was exactly why she stood out. Investors began asking questions. Where did you find her? What's her background? Is she a consultant? Grant always answered the same way. She's helping me see things differently. But behind the scenes, their lives were slowly entwining. Harper wasn't just his image fixer. She was there when Max refused to eat vegetables. When the alarm went off at 3 a.m. and everyone panicked, she was the one who figured out it was just a dead battery. She left notes on Grant's desk, ideas about workplace morale, sustainable urban tech, and inclusive hiring policies. One evening, he found a sticky note on his quarterly projection report. What if you asked them what they need first? It was an idea no one in the executive suite had thought of, and it worked. Over time, what started as a performance began to feel less like fiction and more like a possibility. But neither of them dared to admit it, yet. Grant Remington was used to being the smartest person in the room. He had built Remtech from a scrappy startup into a billion-dollar giant by trusting logic numbers and razor-sharp instincts. Feelings were for Hallmark movies. Emotions, unreliable distractions. But lately he found himself checking the hallway more often, hoping to see Harper. And it wasn't because of appearances. It was because of her notes. At first they'd started small, scribbled ideas on his reports, suggestions about employee wellness initiatives, or articles she left on his desk, with a highlighted line and a sticky note. This could work for Remtech's underfunded neighborhoods project. He hadn't asked for her input, but when he tested a few of her ideas, things started to click. Then came the crisis. 2 days before, Remtech was set to pitch its Horizon initiative, a bold plan to bring tech access and clean energy into underserved city zones. The lead executive, David Nolan, landed in the ER with appendicitis. Panic swept the top floor. The boardroom was booked. International investors were flying in. The stakes, a $20 million fund. Grant was pacing his office when Harper walked in, holding Max's school schedule in one hand and a folder of doodles in the other. "Ich muss das big stare, six to bide, but you okay?" she asked, sensing the tension. "No," he admitted. "David's out. The biggest pitch of the year is in 48 hours, and I've got no one else to present." Harper glanced at the proposal notes on his desk, notes she'd quietly read over the last month. "I can do it," she said. Grant laughed until he saw her face. She wasn't joking. "You're not trained in public speaking. You haven't worked in infrastructure or clean energy development. But I've lived in neighborhoods like the ones you're trying to help," she said softly. "I know what cracked sidewalks feel like, what it's like when the streetlights don't work. Your pitch has the facts. What it doesn't have is a story. I can tell that story." And she did. 2 days later, standing at the head of a glass-walled conference room overlooking the skyline, Harper wore a simple navy blazer and white blouse. Her hair, loosely tied back, moved just slightly as she spoke, calm, clear, unscripted. "My name is Harper Collins," she began. "I'm not an engineer. I'm not a developer. I'm someone who grew up learning to jump over broken sidewalks before I could spell the word infrastructure." She clicked to the next slide, an image of an abandoned playground. "This was my after-school care," she said. "This is why Horizon matters, not just for tech expansion, but for dignity." The room was silent, the kind of silence that happens when something honest slices through the noise. Then came questions, hard ones. She answered with calm authority. One investor asked about community ownership models. "Have you studied the Mason Solar pilot program in Detroit?" she asked. "Because I believe we can adapt something similar here." Grant, sitting at the end of the table, was stunned. Not just because she knew what she was talking about, but because the investors were nodding. By the time the meeting ended, Harper had earned not just applause, but a business card from Jules Marchand, and a quiet request to meet again to discuss strategic collaboration. As the room emptied, Grant stayed behind. "Where did you learn all that?" he asked. "I told you," she said, packing up her notes. "I'm more than a nanny." He smiled, the kind of smile that happens when the ground beneath you shifts and you're not afraid of falling anymore. In that moment, he realized something else. It wasn't just Remtech that needed her. It was him. It had been a whirlwind month since the Horizon Initiative pitch, and Harper's presence at Remtech had quietly evolved from unexpected +1 to the person everyone wanted to meet. Her ideas were spreading through departments, her calm confidence disarming even the most skeptical executives. Grant had started relying on her, for insight, for grounding, and more than he cared to admit, for comfort. That's why she was at his side again this time, at an intimate investor dinner held at the skylight room of the Langford Hotel. The setting was elegant, the guest list short. International investors mingled with board members over candlelight and soft jazz. Harper wore a charcoal gray dress, simple but sharp. Her presence turned heads not for its flash, but for its command. Grant introduced her as a key part of the Horizon team, and she smiled politely, downplaying the title, but not her worth. Then Victoria Langford arrived. Tall, polished, and effortlessly calculating, Victoria was Grant's former partner and daughter of the hotel's owner. She swept into the room like she still owned a part of him, and maybe in some ways believed she did. As dinner progressed, Victoria joined their table. Her eyes flicked toward Harper, scanning her with that all-too-familiar look of social superiority. "So," she said, sipping from her wine glass, "how long have you been with Remtech, Harper?" "Is 14 hours. Baseball." Harper met her gaze without blinking. "A few months, mostly consulting on community strategy." "Is that what we're calling childcare now?" Victoria said, her smile dagger sharp. "I thought you were Max's nanny." The words cut like ice water. Conversations around the table faltered. A waiter paused mid-pour. Harper sat still, her fork hovering above her plate. "Yes," she said slowly. "I take care of Max, and I'm proud of that." She turned toward the table, voice steady. Before that, I was a waitress, a caregiver, a tutor, and at every step I did my job with integrity. That's more than I can say for some people with fancier resumes. Victoria's eyes narrowed, but the damage was done. Not by Harper, but by the silence that followed. All eyes turned to Grant, and he said nothing. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't look at Victoria. He didn't defend the woman who had saved his company's biggest pitch, who had helped raise his son, who had changed his life. Harper rose from her chair, gently placed her napkin on the table, and gave one last look at Grant. "I thought you were different," she said quietly. "But when it mattered, you chose comfort over courage." She walked out, her heels clicking with quiet dignity. Grant remained seated, frozen. Around him, the room buzzed with half-whispers and sideways glances, but none of it registered. He couldn't hear the music anymore. All he heard was the echo of his own cowardice. Later that night, back at his penthouse, Grant found Max asleep on the couch, with Harper's handmade bedtime storybook clutched in his hands, the kind with glitter glue and pages full of paper stars. In the stillness of that moment, Grant realized the truth. He hadn't just let Harper down. He'd let down the best thing that had ever happened to him. And this time, she might not be coming back. The next morning, Grant Remington sat in his office, tie undone blinds, half-closed, untouched espresso, cooling beside a stack of reports he couldn't read. His empire still functioned like clockwork. Emails came in, deals were signed, stock prices ticked upward. But inside, everything had stalled. Harper was gone. She hadn't returned any messages, not the "I'm sorry" text, not the follow-up email, not even the envelope he'd left with the driver. Her last paycheck with a handwritten note that simply read, "You deserved more than silence." Max asked for her 3 times before school. Grant had no answer. That afternoon, on an impulse he couldn't fully explain, Grant left the office, got into his car, and drove downtown. Not to the polished districts Remtech helped redesign, but to the neighborhood Harper had once mentioned in passing, the one with crumbling brick buildings and a mural of a girl holding a book painted across a cracked alley wall. He asked around. At a corner bakery, a woman smiled at the mention of Harper's name. "That girl, she organized our community tutoring program before she ever stepped into your world," she said, handing him a butter roll wrapped in wax paper. "You want to know who she is? Ask the families she helped when no one else would." At the local rec center, he found photos of Harper plastered across a bulletin board. Harper helping children plant vegetables in a community garden. Harper hosting a workshop for single mothers on budgeting. Harper reading to a group of kids while holding a baby on her hip. Every story painted the same picture, not of a woman waiting to be discovered, but of a woman who had always been doing the work. Grant left the center carrying a weathered portfolio with her name written in fading black ink, Harper Collins, Social Impact Concepts. Inside were sketches, community redesign ideas, even drafts of grant proposals dated long before she met him. She hadn't just impressed a room, she'd been ready for that room for years. The world just hadn't let her in. The next morning, Grant marched into the Remtech board meeting with the portfolio under his arm. "This is Harper Collins." He began setting it on the conference table. "You know her as the woman who helped land us the Horizon deal. But what you don't know is that she's been designing community infrastructure projects long before any of us ever shook her hand." He outlined a proposal, a new division, Remtech Social Impact, with Harper as its founding director, full autonomy, her own team, a permanent seat at the executive table. There were questions, pushback, eyebrows raised, but Grant wasn't asking. He was backing her, and for once he didn't care how unorthodox it looked. He cared about what was right. That evening, Harper was packing boxes in her apartment. Her old suitcase was open, half filled with books. Max's drawings and a jar of notes she'd written to herself. Dreams she'd once been too afraid to say out loud. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Grant. No suit, no entourage, just a folder in hand and exhaustion in his eyes. "I went looking for answers," he said softly, "and I found out I never really saw you. Not the way I should have." He handed her the proposal still unsigned. "You should be leading, not babysitting my world." Harper took the folder, scanning the title. Her eyes flicked up to him. "You're serious." "Dead serious," he said. "But this isn't a bribe. If you take this job, it's yours to shape. No strings, no pretending." She looked at him for a long moment. I also got an offer from the Urban Resilience Fund in Chicago, she said carefully. They saw the Horizon speech. They want me to lead a national initiative. Grant swallowed hard. Then I won't beg, he said, but I'll say this. I'll support you either way, because real love means letting someone grow, even if it's without you. Harper exhaled slowly, the edges of her heart softening. You really believe that? I do now, he said, because you taught me. And in that quiet apartment surrounded by packed boxes and scattered memories, something shifted. Redemption had walked in the door, not with roses or promises, but with action, humility, and truth. 3 weeks passed. Harper took the job, not the one in Chicago, but the one she never expected to be offered, the directorship of Remtech's brand new social impact division. She negotiated every clause herself, assembled her team from voices often left out, and made it clear this wouldn't be a charity front. It would be a movement. And it was... The press picked up the story. From nanny to national leader ran one headline. Another read, The Woman Rewriting Corporate Responsibility. Harper didn't read most of them. She was too busy building something real. Grant stayed in the background. He respected her space, her terms. He sent no flowers, made no late-night calls. But he did leave her sticky notes after meetings. Insightful, respectful, sometimes a little funny. Anne, Max, he left her a different kind of note every day, folded into little rockets, always ending with, "Come home soon, please." Then one Saturday, Harper received a text from Grant's assistant. Can you stop by Astoria Plaza tomorrow afternoon? It's a community thing, casual. She almost said no, but something tugged at her, a curiosity, a memory, or maybe deep down, a hope. She arrived dressed simply, denim jacket, low heels, a soft blue blouse. The moment she turned the corner, she stopped in her tracks. Astoria Plaza. The very heart of the city's oldest neighborhood had been transformed. Colorful tents fluttered in the breeze. Booths lined with handmade soaps, breads, and candles. The same small businesses Harper had helped incubate were buzzing with customers. Kids ran through chalk-drawn mazes. Strings of lights hung above a wooden stage surrounded by flowers. It was community day, and it was hers. She scanned the crowd and then saw him. Grant standing near the stage holding Max's hand. Both dressed neatly but casually, like they belonged there, like they weren't trying to impress anyone. Max spotted her first and waved, bouncing in place. When she reached them, Grant smiled, nervous for the first time in forever. You made it, he said. You did all this, Harper asked, stunned. With your team, he nodded. I just followed the blueprint. Why? Grant looked at her for a moment, then stepped up onto the small stage. The microphone crackled. Good afternoon, he said to the crowd. Today I'm not speaking as a CEO. I'm speaking as a man who's been changed by this community, by this project, and by one person in particular. Harper froze. In every boardroom I've walked into, I was taught to lead with logic. But she taught me to lead with heart. She taught me that listening is a form of leadership, that compassion can be strategy, that dignity matters, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is love. He looked toward Max and gave the signal. Max sprinted onto the stage and handed him a small velvet box. Then Grant dropped to one knee. Gasps echoed. The market fell quiet. Harper Collins, he said, voice steady but thick with feeling. Would you change the rest of my life by saying yes? Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled up instantly. You're insane, she whispered, laughing through the sobs. You planned a festival to propose. He smiled up at her. You once said love isn't supposed to look like a checklist. I figured I'd throw the checklist away. She took a long, trembling breath, looked at Max, then at the community around her, the families, the booths, the murals, all of it touched by her work, her ideas, her belief in something better. Yes, she said, yes, I will. The crowd erupted in cheers. Max jumped and wrapped his arms around her legs. Grant slipped the ring onto her finger. Nothing flashy, just simple, beautiful, and hers. They kissed. Not for show, not for optics, but because in that moment they were no longer pretending. They were exactly where they were meant to be. 3 months had passed since Harper Collins said yes. But there was no whirlwind media wedding, no diamond-drenched headlines or extravagant beachside ceremonies. Instead, Harper and Grant chose to marry right there, in the same plaza where he had knelt in front of her, under the same string lights, with the same community cheering them on. The ceremony was simple. Max walked ahead of them down the aisle in a navy blazer, proudly carrying the rings in a hand-painted wooden box. Harper wore a flowy dress stitched by a local artisan. Her hair was pinned back with flowers from the community garden she'd helped restore. Grant, in rolled sleeves and a navy vest, looked at her like she was the only thing that had ever made sense. Their vows were honest. Harper promised to speak her mind, to challenge him when he forgot what people needed. Grant promised to listen, to lead with empathy, and to never again let silence speak for him. After the ceremony, they danced to a live quartet, playing under the trees. Max joined them, stepping onto Grant's shoes like he used to when he was 5. Together they spun slowly in the golden light of sunset. Just 3 people who had built something beautiful out of broken pieces. And while the city buzzed beyond the plaza, inside it, time slowed. Their marriage wasn't just a love story. It was a partnership rooted in shared purpose. Together, Harper and Grant led Remtech's social programs across the country. They expanded into rural towns and inner cities. Harper insisted on local voices at every decision-making table. Grant made room for them. The impact was undeniable. Youth mentorships, community business grants, maternal wellness clinics. Programs designed not from boardroom theories but lived experience. Productivity at Remtech soared. Employee retention improved. And more importantly, lives changed. But even as the headlines praised them and the awards rolled in, they kept their nights simple. Grant cooked on Thursdays. Harper read Max bedtime stories. Still always, with those silly voices. And when Max once asked, "Do you think every kid gets a story like ours?" Harper smiled and pulled him close. "Not always," she said, "but that's why we keep telling ours. Not every love story begins with sparks. Some start with a job posting. Some begin in silence with no promises, no music. Just the quiet sound of someone doing their best with no one watching." Harper and Grant didn't fall in love because they were perfect. They fell in love because they saw each other's mess and chose to stay. Because she challenged him to be more, and he gave her the space to become who she'd always been. It wasn't about wealth or image or reputation. It was about finding the rarest thing of all, someone who believes in you before the world does. And in the end, what they built wasn't just a family or a company. It was a legacy, a reminder that real change doesn't start at the top. It starts with the courage to speak up and the grace to listen. So if you ever feel overlooked, underestimated, or stuck on the outside looking in, remember, maybe your story hasn't started yet. But when it does, make it real, make it yours, and never apologize for who you are.